All right, Nuggets fans, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends here at Mile High Sports. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. And I am here. I'm ready to talk about some trades, not necessarily for the Nuggets, but really like the entire NBA, just thinking about the way that the league is going to shift. You're hearing, and like there's a lot of folks, national folks, Brian Windhorst, Mark Stein, Sham Charania, they have all effectively said that they expect a pretty busy offseason around the NBA. So I'm going to take a look at some of these names, at some of the players, some of the teams that are looking to make some changes. And I'm going to ask the simple question: are the Nuggets going to be a team that's affected? Are they going to be a team that's involved? Are they going to try to target one of these players? I don't really expect it, but you never know. There's an opportunity maybe to try to get involved at some of these deals, but Denver, of course, doesn't have a lot to work with. They would have to be extremely committed in order to try to get one of these players, I think. So we'll go into it. I'm very curious to see what everybody has to say about these particular guys. And if you have other players that I missed, most likely I consider them kind of lower in the pecking order than the players that I have on the list that I'm about to share. But I do think that there's a lot of fascinating names that could be on the move, most likely larger salaried players, but some smaller salary players that I think Nuggets fans might be curious about. Without further ado, let's talk about it. The Giannis Antetokounmpo and Kevin Durant trade situations are going to be very fascinating this year. Giannis hasn't demanded a trade. It's not clear whether he's actually going to move or not. There's a lot of reasons to believe that he should move if he wants to individually prop up his own career and do what's best for winning as many championships as possible, things like that. The Milwaukee Bucks are in a really, really tough spot. Damian Lillard is under contract for 2 more years. He has a torn Achilles. He is already older, drafted way back in 2012. It's now 2025. That's actually one thing that I've had to process over the course of these last couple of days as I kind of look at different draft classes and think about different players. A lot of the guys that I remember early in the draft and early in the process that I've been going through this are now like double digit veterans, like double digit years in the NBA. And time flies so fast that Giannis, who is consistently like one of the young stars in the NBA, is now older. He's now like 2013 NBA draft or whatever it was. Like he was like it's been 12 years for him. So very interesting to see a lot of these situations change. And I think Giannis and Kevin Durant, two guys that I think that really manifests. Back in 2021, this was the best and second best player in the NBA, at least by general analysis. I think Jokic hadn't fully broken in yet. LeBron had dropped off just a touch, and Steph wasn't out there all the time. It was pretty clear for a lot of people that Giannis, especially after winning a championship, but Kevin Durant matching him in that series, like these two were just 4 years ago the best and second best player in the NBA, and now they are on the trade market. Kevin Durant, of course, way older, drafted all the way back in 2007, and wherever they go, like you get the sense that a lot of the teams are going to wait for clarity on the Giannis situation, on the Kevin Durant situation, before they proceed with the rest of their off seasons. So this might drag on. It'll be interesting to see when Giannis ultimately makes the determination of whether he wants to come back to Milwaukee or not. Obviously, he's been out in the first round in each of the last 3 seasons, which is just unacceptable for a player of his status. And then with Kevin Durant, things worked out so poorly for Phoenix over the course of this past couple of years. First round exit to Minnesota in like not last year, but the year before. And then this past season, they like are the 10th worst team in the NBA. clearly outside of the range of contenders when they're spending as much money as they are on Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal. So I think that those two are going to provide like a lot of clarity for how the rest of the offseason is going to go. I'm not going to sit here and try to predict which teams are going to go after Giannis and Kevin Durant. I think, if I'm going to be honest, like 28 of them will at least have the conversation. Should we go after these guys? For teams like Washington and Charlotte, the answer is going to be a very quick no. It's almost embarrassing to reach out at that point. For teams like the Nuggets, yeah, you'd love to get involved with those conversations for sure. With Giannis, I think Denver, like if there was an opportunity to break up the core four, I think the Nuggets would listen on Giannis Antetokounmpo. Do I think Milwaukee would listen on Denver? No. I don't think that Denver has enough assets to even make a conversation viable. With Kevin Durant, it's a little bit different. He's going to cost much less. There was a report from Kelly Iko of The Athletic. He covers Houston, kind of covering the Kevin Durant trade from Houston's perspective. Said that Phoenix had lowered their asking price for Kevin Durant. So it's very possible that a team like Phoenix would try to like give Kevin Durant to Denver or Houston or one of these other contenders that don't necessarily have a blue chip opportunity to give or wouldn't necessarily want to do that. Like Houston, if they wanted to, they could throw Amin Thompson in the deal and get that thing done real quick. But they're not going to do that because why would they? Denver doesn't really have an Amin Thompson to throw out there. It doesn't even have an Alperen Sengun really to throw out there. If Denver were to trade for Kevin Durant, there's really only two ways they could do it, maybe three. I'm kind of skipping the Giannis conversation because unless Giannis says that he wants to come to the Denver Nuggets, it's not happening. And I don't think he's going to say that. I think he's competitive enough that he doesn't want to go team up with Jokic. Kevin Durant has obviously never had a problem teaming up with other superstars. So if Denver wanted to trade for Kevin Durant, they could do it in three ways. First and foremost, you have to break up the core four in order to do it. You could trade Michael Porter by himself, along with Christian Brown, Peyton Watson. You have to throw in Dario Saric and Zeke Naji, and then you could take back some small salary from Phoenix. Think like Ryan Dunn or Nick Richards or somebody like that. But because Michael Porter makes $38 million and Kevin Durant makes $55 million, it's almost impossible to make up that difference in salary unless you're throwing in a whole bunch of different players. And I don't think that Phoenix really wants that. I think they want to make their books a little bit cleaner, not messy with adding 5 different players for Kevin Durant and maybe one other guy. So the other option that Denver could go with is trading multiple of the core 4 to pair Jokic and Durant together. I don't think that that's really viable either. It doesn't sound like Denver's really that interested in doing something like that. Most likely it would be Michael Porter and Aaron Gordon for Kevin Durant, but like that would get you there money-wise. That would get you to about $60 million, and then maybe you could finagle something else and get another wingback like a Grayson Allen who makes probably more money, or maybe Royce O'Neal is a better option for them, but it doesn't really help from a depth standpoint. It would certainly help from a star power standpoint. Kevin Durant can, of course, take a lot of the crazy shots that he always does and would be a threat during the regular season, would take some pressure off of Jokic as another star. Jamal Murray would become the third best player in that situation. But Denver doesn't help their depth, and it would be almost impossible for them to help their depth in that case. And you would also have to figure out who starts in place of one of Porter or Gordon along with Durant. The final thing they could do is trade Jamal Murray. And that might actually get some traction if you were Phoenix, like pairing Jamal Murray and Devin Booker, assuming that they could get off of Bradley Beal's deal in some way, Could Jamal Murray and Devin Booker be two star guards that they tag team and say, hey, this is our version of Lillard and McCollum, and we'll do a better job of building around those guys than Portland could? Not necessarily awesome, but if you are Phoenix and you believe that you could recruit some other guys to Phoenix, which they've had pretty good success doing, then maybe that's viable. But if you're Denver, you'd have to figure out what to do with the point guard situation. I don't think Russell Westbrook cuts it in that situation. You need somebody else who's a little bit more kind of low volume, low mistake, somebody kind of like a Tyus Jones, actually. Jalen Pickett's not starting in that situation, so Denver would have a lot of questions. Overall, I just don't see it. I think that Phoenix could get a better deal than what Denver could realistically offer. And if they're throwing in just Michael Porter, they probably have to throw in Christian Brown as well in order to kind of make it work. And then you're starting to get into a situation like you just don't have enough minutes at that point in your playoff rotation to really justify doing something like that. So I don't think Denver's in a good position where they could go get either of those guys. But there are other teams that could, and that market will absolutely impact Denver. I'm thinking Houston, of course, for both of those guys would be a pretty easy opportunity to make that happen. Minnesota, 2 straight years that they've gone to the Western Conference Finals, but haven't necessarily made it over the top. I don't think Giannis is a good candidate for Minnesota, but Durant is somebody that they pursued at the trade deadline, and apparently there was interest from Durant as well. So could they turn some of their wing depth, Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, into Kevin Durant? Maybe. Would you trade Rudy Gobert in that situation, a large salary? Maybe pair him and Devin Booker together as a good pick and roll duo. If you're the Suns, it's not the worst idea in the world, but also necessarily not the best idea in the world. So I don't know if that's something that's super viable. Would the Celtics do something crazy and trade? Would they trade Jaylen Brown for Kevin Durant? Would they trade? Not the Celtics. Would the Raptors? The Raptors have been in the news for a Kevin Durant or a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. You're going to hear a lot of names. You're going to hear a lot of teams. Everybody's going to make calls. Everybody's going to try to figure it out. Miami is, of course, a name to watch for both of them. I think that if you're Denver, you would like for it to not be Minnesota. You'd like for it to not be Houston. But other than that, you don't really care. As long as if both of them were to go east, that would be great for Denver too. Okay. Let's look at 3 other candidates here, and then we'll talk about 5 more on the other side. I want to look at Karl Anthony Towns. Tom Thibodeau just got fired by the New York Knicks for some reason. I'm not really sure why. Apparently he was in the hot seat. They didn't like some of the stuff that he was doing. They were talking about him overplaying the starters. They didn't necessarily like everything that was going on and how he treated certain guys. He sometimes closed with Mitchell Robinson over Karl Anthony Towns in the playoffs. A lot of that is because it's really hard for Towns and Brunson to function against really great offenses. They can't defend. And so that's one of the reasons why they lost to Indiana. Would that cause them to actually move Towns? Would they seriously consider that after trading him just 1 year ago? Maybe it depends on who they get for their coach. Maybe it's like, can a coach figure that out? Is there there's no real financial way for them to add to their team. They're going to be up against the second apron again. So one of the ways that they could do it is they could trade Towns and then have Mitchell Robinson in there. Maybe they get another starting center in such a Towns deal. But like Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac, Cole Anthony, and a first-round pick for Karl Anthony Towns. Would either team do that? I don't know. Orlando's about to get very expensive, but they could certainly use another offensive guy to really space the floor for Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs down there. That's not necessarily a great proposal, but Toronto's another name to watch for sure for something like that. I could absolutely see RJ Barrett and Jakob Pertl for or for Karl Anthony Towns, among other things that would likely have to be involved. But that's a name to watch out for, especially after Thibodeau got fired. Maybe the reason he got fired was because they want to keep Towns, but that is something that I'm watching for sure. The final two are from the same team, Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton. Cam Johnson is a name that a lot of Nuggets fans have had their eye on. I've seen a lot of trades, including from our friend Jake Coyne, who I'm going to have on the show at some point before free agency kind of kicks off, so we can talk about a whole bunch of different scenarios. I would really like to do that because I've got so many things boiling around in my head. I've written a 3,000 word article that I haven't dropped yet, and it's got a whole bunch of different scenarios in it. And so Jake is going to be able to help me. One of those scenarios that Jake has outlined is Cam Johnson for Michael Porter Jr. and a first-round pick. Now, Cam Johnson makes a whole bunch less money, so much so that such a deal would be pretty imbalanced from a salary standpoint. Makes $20.5 million in this upcoming season, if I'm not mistaken. He had a descending contract that makes this upcoming year for Cam Johnson's contract way less money. It was 24.4, then it was 22.5 this year, then it's 20.5 this next season, and then 22.5 after that. He doesn't do things that much better than Michael Porter, but he's more healthy and available. He's better playmaker, and he's somebody that I think could be a little bit more reliable in a playoff series if Denver was really curious about that. However, if you're the Nets, do you really want to do that deal? Can't you get a better contract and a better deal for you than Michael Porter and a first-round pick? Like, that's not going to be enough. It's just not. And I know a lot of Nuggets fans are not going to want to hear that. If Cam Johnson gets traded, he's going to get traded for way easier salary to manage and a first-round pick. Michael Porter's salary is a negative, I think, at this point. And it just, to me, it doesn't make sense as that construction because it's like $18 million less per year. And yes, Brooklyn has the flexibility to be able to do it, which is why they are interesting because they could free up, I think, as much as like $70 million in cap space. And they could do more if they trade Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, guys like that. It would not surprise me. And like, there's no real great free agents in this class. Miles Turner is like the best free agent available, and it's pretty apparent that they're going to try to keep him in Indiana. But I just don't see Brooklyn being passive at this deadline. I think they're going to try to sell off those vets, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, the only two guys that they have really. And they're going to try to get as many assets and young players as possible. And they're really going to try to extend that rebuild. Well, maybe signing some guys to some value free agency contracts, seeing like, hey, they did it with Dennis Schroeder last year. Hey, we're going to give you a 1 year, $12 million deal, and we're going to let you get out on the market in free agency next year. He actually got traded to Detroit because he was a valuable player. And so I'm not surprised that like they're kind of in this position because they wanted to leave themselves open for 2025 if they could develop some guys. That really hasn't been the case, and they're too far away. So I think they are going to sell again. I'd be surprised if they kept both of those guys. Maybe they keep one, but I would expect Nick Claxton to be a guy that the Lakers target. I'd expect everybody to target Cam Johnson because he literally is the perfect NBA role-playing starter / bench guy because of the contract that he has, the position that he has, the skill set that he has. There's just a lot there that he can add to a team. And because of that, Brooklyn's going to command a very high price. Okay. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'm going to share 5 other names that I'm very curious to hear your thoughts about in the comments section. And we'll talk about whether Denver can go get some of these guys. We'll be right back here on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Would really, really appreciate it. Like I said, I've got a whole bunch of content that is going to be released over the course of this next month or so. And there's a lot of prep stuff for free agency, for trades. There's not a lot of prep stuff for the draft. I'm sorry. There's no picks. There's nothing that Denver can really do. There's no real reason for them to get involved in the draft, I think. Maybe they get another Jalen Pickett type or Hunter Tyson type. Like that's all they could really hope to do. But it is so hit and miss. And because they've already got a Jalen Pickett and a Hunter Tyson on the roster, I don't really think they're going to waste their time with it. So we'll see what happens. But I think Denver, there are 2 main ways that they can improve for the team. It's free agency and it's trades. On a future episode, I'll talk about free agency. On a future episode, I'll also talk about value trades and moves that I think Denver could make that are not in this realm. But for now, let's talk about some other big names that are out there right now, including Paul George. Call him the B version of Kevin Durant, man. Like maybe even C version with the way that his season went. But if you believe that Paul George is still a good basketball player and was just kind of in the realm of, yeah, it was an uncomfortable situation. Joel Embiid was in and out of the lineup. It was a cursed season. Paul George also had a down year trying to learn a different setting, excuse me. And if you believe that he's still good, then Philly might be willing to deal with you, man. If you're Denver, can you justify moving Michael Porter Jr. and whatever salary it takes for Paul George? I'm not sure you would really have to do that much from a pick standpoint. Maybe you would be. So Paul George makes $51.6 million. Like that's going to be a lot. So it's something that Denver would have to overcome in any deal. But I'm looking at the trade machine right now, and I think you could justify Michael Porter, Zeke Naji, and could you throw in Peyton Watson? Does that get you there? No, it doesn't quite get you there. You would still need to throw in a little bit more in order to make it happen. So, is there a cheap contract that they have? Maybe you could go get somebody like Adem Bona from their side and then throw in, if you throw in Hunter Tyson from your side, no, it's really tough. that is a really tough deal for Denver to get. The long and short of it, actually, was it? No, it's not. It's not a. Oh, they could take in Bona into a taxpayer, into a trade exception in order to make it happen. That would be crazy. The long and short of it is that I don't think that Denver is the right fit for Paul George, but Denver's had interest in Paul George before. They've at least explored the idea of making a deal for with the Clippers for Michael Porter. I believe it was one of Peyton Watson or Julian Strawther, Christian Brown, and then matching salary in order to get it done. And then maybe a first-round pick. They've explored that idea. They ultimately decided no, and maybe they were right to do it. Maybe they were wrong, but also maybe they were right. And it's pretty clear that Philly has some buyer's remorse based off of the fact that he might be available. But because Philly has the 3rd pick, because it's really hard for them to trust Embiid's health, because they've got Maxey, they are trying to pivot. They're trying to, I think, pivot for their future. So does Paul George really line up with that? Probably not. He's a name to at least discuss if you're a Nuggets fan. Next name on the list, is somebody who has popped up in rumors recently, Trey Murphy. Trey Murphy III for the New Orleans Pelicans had a great season. He was fantastic this year. 21 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists or so, shooting deep threes, shooting off the dribble, not necessarily like an elite creator per se, but better creator than Porter, somebody who's more athletic at this stage, somebody who can lock in and is a good enough defender. I wouldn't call him elite by any stretch of the word, but he's a serviceable defender for sure. And somebody that you can trust to be in the system. He signed a contract earlier to be, I think it was like a 4-year, $100 million contract or so, as an extension with the Pelicans back in, I want to say 2019. Could be wrong about that. Time flies, man. But the long and short of it is that he is a player that, like, there were betting markets. Bovada, I believe, was the name of the company that had trade odds, like, for the next team for Trey Murphy, and the Nuggets were number one. They were number one on that list. Talking to Matt Moore over at Locked On Nuggets and a friend and coworker, he has experience, of course, with the betting markets, and said that there isn't really any downside to, like, them putting out odds. Like, there's no penalty if they get it wrong. They're just trying to really drum up interest and intrigue and get people to click and try to get people onto their website. And that's really what Bovada is trying to do. If it was Bovada, it was one of those. I don't necessarily think that there's any actual legs to Trey Murphy being a guy that Denver could get. Again, kind of like the Cam Johnson situation. If there was a deal to be had, Denver would not be the team that those teams would be trying to target. Like, there's no way that Denver would have the best offer in those circumstances. Now, might be a situation where those teams run out of trade offers and Denver's is the best out there because those other teams are good. They've done what they want to do. And maybe it's Cam Johnson, maybe it's Trey Murphy, maybe it's one of those guys, and Denver tries to upgrade over Michael Porter. But then again, Josh Kroenke may not necessarily think that that's much of an upgrade. And it's also very difficult from a salary perspective, especially for the Pelicans. So I would take it with a grain of salt, not expecting a deal like that to happen. But again, Cam Johnson, Trey Murphy, either of those guys get moved, you better believe that they could shift a playoff race or a regular season win race. Like, Cleveland, I think, is a good example of that, where they traded for DeAndre Hunter. They won 64 games, and it was great up until he got hurt, up until their entire team really suffered some injuries and then suffered some mental stuff that they clearly were not ready for that moment in the playoffs. But I do think that if one of those guys, Trey Murphy or Cam Johnson, got moved, it would be very similar to DeAndre Hunter, but a higher level because they're better players. I do not think that Denver can get either of them, but if they could, that'd obviously be great. That would be like that would be a serious move. And it's one of the reasons I just don't expect it to happen, because I'm looking at Denver's salary and asset situation. I cannot for the life of me fathom why anybody would let Denver get one of those guys, because they are so good, and giving them Nikola Jokic to pass them the ball would be insane. That would be a stupid thing for all of those teams to do. And you could say that about like Kevin Durant, perhaps. Three other names, and then we'll get out of here. RJ Barrett is the first one. Toronto is in a very interesting position where, like I talked about with Giannis, they might make a run at him. They might make a run at Towns. They might make a run at some of these other big names. Barrett is a likely salary matching piece because they traded for Brandon Ingram, signed him to an extension in the offseason. They are in the trade deadline, I think. They are committed to Ingram. And where does that leave Barrett, I think, is a very fair question. He's not really their two guard. He's not really somebody that they like. I think they like Grady Dick. I think they like Ochai Agbaji. I think they like Jacoby Walter among three of the guys that they have drafted or added to their squad. And so I would expect them to continue to go young unless they make a big move. But their big move might just be moving RJ Barrett and clearing up some salary, clearing up some cap space, doing some things to kind of further their building around Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, guys like that. And so could Denver get involved in something like that? No. I did at one point throw out an idea of Denver trading Jamal Murray in a deal that gets them back Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett. A solid starting point guard, and I think a solid starting wing. I wouldn't call RJ Barrett much more than that, but two solid starters for one player that is, I'd call him a fringe all-star in Jamal. Like during the regular season, you know what you're getting. During the playoffs, you might get something more. But just in general, could you turn his contract into a couple of solid starters? Maybe Toronto could be interested in Michael Porter spacing around guys like Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes. Maybe they could really use something like that. Who knows? I do think that there is at least a world where those guys could be available. Like RJ Barrett could be somebody that Denver looks at. Is he the right fit for Denver, given that they already have Christian Brown and Aaron Gordon? I don't know. It's not a perfect fit. You would like somebody who's more of a spacer. You would like Michael Porter, but healthier and better on defense. That's like Trey Murphy or Cam Johnson, for what it's worth. PJ Washington is another name that I'm thinking about. When the Dallas Mavericks surprised everybody and traded for Anthony Davis, they had Luka Doncic, they had a good setup, they had everything that you would think would lead them to being a championship contender again. And then they traded Luka, and then Kyrie Irving tore his ACL, and then a whole bunch of other guys got hurt too. There's a lot of guys that got hurt, and they just, like, including Anthony Davis. And so you didn't really see much of their team, but they faltered in the play-in. They couldn't get past Memphis among all teams. And you start to think about the lineups that they're going to be able to bring back if they're fully healthy, sans Kyrie Irving, who was out with a torn ACL. PJ Washington being their starting small forward isn't necessarily a great fit. Like, they've got Klay Thompson, they've got Najee Marshall, they've got PJ Washington, they've got Caleb Martin, they've got a couple of other guys, but they've also got nobody at point guard. And if you're starting Derek Lively, which I think they should, and if you're starting Anthony Davis, which they're obviously going to do, you need a spacer at three. You need somebody who can really space the floor. PJ Washington, for as good as he is, isn't necessarily that. So see somebody that, with his free agency coming up, not this year, but the next year, see somebody that they could look to trade. Could Denver sneak in for a guy like PJ Washington? Even if they're not going to start PJ Washington in Denver, could they make him a sixth man? That is an idea that I'm going to bring for a separate article. But somebody like that, I think, would be very, very interesting for Denver. Just really trying to condense talent as much as possible. And you would be able to do that without breaking up your starting five. Like, you could keep those guys if you felt so inclined and just make PJ Washington your super sixth man who could play small forward, power forward, and maybe even a little bit of small ball center in certain lineups. Just something to think about, and something that I think the Nuggets should consider when, you got to get creative in these situations. And maybe Washington is somebody that could help you do so. Finally, Drew Holiday is the last one. I don't think Derek White's getting traded from Boston, but I do think that that Drew Holiday will. Because of the Jason Tatum Achilles tear, Boston's in this holding pattern, kind of like how Denver was after Murray tore his ACL back in 2021, and then it impacted 2022 as a result. Drew Holiday by the time Jason Tatum comes back and is ready to be Jason Tatum again, is going to be old, maybe even retired, certainly not a starting caliber player anymore. Um, and Boston's going to stay super expensive throughout all of this. So they're going to try to sell off some money. And I don't think that Denver can get involved in that because Michael Porter is like, that's part of the deal. Michael Porter is like, he's not exactly, he's more expensive than Drew Holiday. But if Denver's looking for more of a guard defender, somebody that they trust, somebody that can help Murray play off the ball a little bit more, can be the Alex Caruso for Denver, the Lou Dort at times for Denver, could be somebody that just augments what the Nuggets were doing in the playoffs, where they were playing Murray Jokic two-man game, Aaron Gordon playing off of it, Christian Brown playing off of it. Drew Holiday would almost be like a supercharged Russell Westbrook at times, where he's just more of a defensive guy, but I don't know if it's the right fit. But just watch out for Boston. Boston is the team with Kristaps Porzingis, with Drew Holiday, maybe even Derek White, that they're going to try to get cheaper. They're going to try to make some moves. I think everybody but Jason Tatum and maybe Jaylen Brown are available, I would guess, at this point. And that'll be a very curious situation to monitor for sure. So I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a crazy offseason. If you have other names that you would like me to discuss on a future episode, drop them in the comments below and I'll read them. I'll try to come up with a better list and we can discuss them. And at some point, I'll go live and you can feed me some names and we'll be able to talk about that for sure. All right, everybody, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Mile High Sports. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit that like button on the way out. I will talk to you guys on Friday.